They keep pushing this talking point. I want to hear your opinion on this.
All right.
Where I'll play the video because they keep on pushing this idea that Putin is trying to colonize Africa because you just had Niger who kicked out United States military bases. You have France that being kicked out of Africa as well. And because of that, the corporate media is in complete shambles. So check this video out.
Losing to Putin, more than 1,000 U.S. military personnel getting kicked out of Niger, an essential military agreement falling apart. Niger, once a major American ally, turning instead to Putin. Russia has been feverishly working to expand its presence, not just in Niger, but across all of Africa, mineral-rich and many, many countries, with one top U.S. military official warning that several African nations are, quote, at the tipping point of falling under Russia's influence. Out front now, John Sullivan, the former U.S. ambassador to Russia. And ambassador, we have seen this in countries, Mali, Burkina Faso, across Africa. Now you've got 1,000 Americans kicked out of Niger, a 10-year deal over. This was a crucial location for U.S. troops, counter-terror efforts. Putin now gaining ground. Can you explain why this matters so much?
Sure. Thanks, Aaron. It's great to be with you. Yeah, this has been a longstanding problem that the Russians, through their proxy organizations like the Wagner Group, have been working to ingratiate themselves into these countries. It undermines the United States counterterrorism mission. You
guys see how they try to make this super scary? The Wagner Group, Russian militias infiltrating Africa. You mean countries that choose to have relationships with Russia over the United States? You see all the spooky language.
Hang on. I like how they're coming right out in the open and saying this. You see the Central African Republic? You see that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which colonial power exercises hegemony over the Central African Republic? France. France. So the Central African Republic is essentially it's a hereditary dictatorship. France pulls their strings. Central African Republic has also had a number of protests in the last several years that have become fatal. The government, the military, has cracked down on protests to the extent that if you go outdoors and organize a protest, they will open fire with live rounds. And the reason for that, and the fact that they actually drew this map, is really interesting to me because it shows how desperate they are. What do you notice about this map? What features of the African geography do you notice about this map? You notice it goes from one coast. Notice it goes from one coast to the other. You notice that it goes from West Africa all the way to the East African coast. You notice that? Yeah. That's the big problem. And that central part of Africa is incredibly rich in precious metals and minerals. The reason I know this is because I'm not going to explain how, on your stream. I'll tell you afterwards. But I happen to have a connection to precious metals and minerals mining. And the person that I know, or the people, I shouldn't say person because there's multiple people, but the people that I know that have put me up on game about what's specific to Central Africa, like where we're seeing right now, as well as parts of South America, especially like on the west coast of South America, Chile, the Andes, etc., Mongolia, Indonesia. The thing that they said to me was that these are the global hotspots. Like this is where the next 100 years of human development is going to be fought. And CNN, I don't think they actually intended to do this, but they actually exposed the game right now. That map is the most precious of Earth's resources are located right there on that map. That's why they're fucking freaking out. Yeah. Uranium, gold, zinc.
So that's why they're scared of Russia's expanding influence, quote unquote.
And just north of Sudan there, if you go north and to the Horn of Africa, actually. So if Ethiopia, Eritrea, etc. The reason that you don't see that portion on the map, is because China has more influence there. So in especially in Somalia, Ethiopia to an extent, Eritrea, Djibouti, very much so because China has a military base there. That area of Africa has massive deposits of gypsum and limestone, which you use to make cement. And the issue is what's happening right now on the African continent. Like, why is it that they're saying that Russia is having this expanding influence, that China is having this expanding influence? Why are they worried about that? Why does the U.S. military have to have a military presence there? Why is it that important? It's not important. They keep saying that it's because of extremist, radical, Islamic militant groups,
They
or
said
whatever the hell they say.
counterterrorism in that segment.
They keep
As
saying
soon
it's
as they say
counterterrorism.
like, get
That's
the fuck
not
out of
why.
here.
It's because the African continent is in a state of rapid industrialization, and it's being financed by China, by Russia, by India. Brazil's even getting in on the game now. And what the United States and the EU have previously done is exploit these countries. So they will hand them loans with, they'll hand them loans, but there's a catch. There are massive strings attached. Sure, Zambia, we're going to give you loans to bail you out of the debt trap that China planted you in. Mind you, China forgave, sorry, I shouldn't say forgave. They allowed Zambia to refinance their debt at no cost, and they were going to offer them to refinance their debt again. And then when they had their elections a couple of years ago, and their new president at the time, Hakainde Hichilema, he ran on a platform of anti-Chinese sentiment. And I think there was partially a good reason for Zambians to resent the Chinese, not because of the loans situation, but because Chinese mining companies, because Zambia has, I'm pretty sure that, they have the world's largest deposits of zinc. So, sorry, not zinc, copper. Zambia was actually, you know how people are fond of saying that Libya was the richest country on the African continent? And that was true. Libya, for a time, was the richest country on the African continent because of its massive oil deposits. But previous to Libya, Zambia was actually the richest country on the African continent, even more so than South Africa. And the reason for that was because of their copper deposits. And with the massive boom in home building across the United States and the EU, during basically every Bretton Woods country underwent a period of rapid post-industrial expansion. Yeah. And so with the building of homes and factories and so on comes a need for copper. I mean, why? I mean, really quick example. The pipes inside of your house, what are they made of? They're made of copper, right? Right? Like your water pipes are made of copper. Your electrical wire made of copper. So along with this massive expansion of homes comes a massive surplus for Zambia because they have these huge copper deposits and they're selling it. I mean, they can basically set their price. And then the Arab oil embargo hits in the 1970s. And suddenly it becomes very expensive to ship copper all the way from Southeast Africa to the rest of the world. So now homes at that period of time, especially in the late 1970s, if you ever buy a home that was made around the late 1970s, your home inspector is going to say to you, hey, the one thing I should tell you is that your house is wired with aluminum. And aluminum will also conduct electricity, but the problem is aluminum will expand and shrink during the summer and winter seasons. Right, so during the winter it shrinks, during summer it expands. They'll say, hey, it's I do need to, it has aluminum wiring. You may want to rethink whether or not you want to buy this home, or if you are going to, you're probably gonna have to rip the wires out and replace it with copper. Now the issue was because Zambia couldn't get rid of its copper deposits, they had to take out these massive IMF loans, a situation that they'd never been in before. They never had to take any loans out because they were basically printing money at this point. I mean, not printing in like the centralized banking sense, but like they were making a mint off of copper sales. So when they lost their primary income earner, they had to take these IMF loans. And what does the IMF demand in return? Well, they have to give up pretty much all of their socialized projects. So when it comes to healthcare, broadcasting, essentially any form of nationalized or socialized services that could be competed with by the private sector, Zambia had to sell them off. And what little they had left, after Hakainde Hichilema wins his election, he then sells off these whatever bare scraps of the public sector are left in Zambia, he ends up having to sell it off to the IMF to retire these Chinese debts. So why did the Zambian people have a problem with the Chinese? Well, not because the Chinese were taking advantage of them. I mean, the Chinese were financing them, but they also, especially during COVID, when a lot of these countries, like the economy came to a standstill, China allowed many of these African countries, including an offer to Zambia, which they actually did once and were going to do again, allowed them to refinance their debt. So when I say refinancing, I mean, if you're making these very high interest payments, but you simply can't afford the interest payments, it's like the interest on your house or like your rent, like you take out a massive loan, but the interest that's due on it on a quarterly or an annual basis, if you can't pay it off, they don't have to get refinanced. So then they'll say, okay, well, all of the money that you have outstanding, like you have, $40 billion outstanding, plus all of the interest payments that you missed. Okay, we'll fold these interest payments into the existing debt, and we'll try to work it out so that you can make a lower payment. Like, pay us what you can for right now, and we'll fold the rest into your debt, which is what they were willing to do. But then Hichilema, because workers in these copper mines were being abused by Chinese managers, now you got to keep in mind, many of the managers for these private Chinese companies are private to the extent that Chinese companies can even be private, but these companies will go into various parts of Africa, etc., and absolutely mistreat the workers. They'll be racist towards them. They'll literally will like physically abuse them, etc. And rightly so. Many of the Zambian workers were pissed off at them, and that Chinese workers were coming into Zambia and being very arrogant with the people around them. And so there began an anti-Chinese sentiment, which the Chinese government did actually attempt to address. So Chinese mining managers that were found guilty of having abused their workers, some cases physical abuse, some cases discrimination, etc., they actually were punished by the Chinese government. So many of them are actually in jail or had to serve sentences. They might be out now, but they did actually have to, they were convicted, had to serve sentences, etc. But what does that mean for the average Zambian? They're not seeing that happen in Zambia because they're not being convicted in Zambian courts. They're being convicted in Chinese courts. So when they end up leaving, your average Zambian is like, oh, okay, well, they're just going to go back to China and then escape any accountability whatsoever. Not true. These people did actually end up going to jail. But then how do you transmit that news back to Zambia in such a way? If the news is being broadcast from China, even like CGTN, which does broadcast in English, is it being picked up in Zambia, for example? So your average person doesn't really know what's happening to these people after they end up leaving the country to face justice back home. So because of the anti-Chinese sentiment, that's how Hichilema ends up winning his election. And then now what position is Zambia in? It's even worse than before. They have fewer public services, and it's basically almost an entirely privatized government. It may as well be El Salvador. It may as well be Argentina right now. That's the situation that it's in. But that map that you just showed from CNN, that is what the United States and that's what the EU fears the most, is that particular band of nations, the states. That tract of land is some of the most valuable land on planet Earth. Almost any precious metal, almost any rare earth metal or any precious metal you could possibly imagine exists in that tract of land in surplus. And previous to this, the EU, the United States, Canada, because Canada has the most mining companies that operate on the African continent, we were benefiting from that and offering them nothing whatsoever. Africa has no railroads. They have no roads. They don't have hospitals. There's school. And I don't want to make it out as if like Africa is just like this continent that is completely dysfunctional, because it's not. I mean, they do have modern schools and hospitals and so forth, but this is a late development. This is only recently happening. And one of the reasons that it's happening now is because Africa has found alternative trade partners that are not just there to overthrow the will of the people, install a puppet government, have these crackpot dictators rob from their people, rape the earth, steal, kill their political opponents. No, they actually have alternative trading partners where they don't have to essentially beggar themselves at the feet of Western countries that should, in essence, be going to African countries, hat in hand, and saying, will you sell to us? Please, we want to be your partners. And that's how China and Russia, India, kind of iffy. Their export-import bank, I think, has been offering some fairly trade deals, especially in Nigeria and in East Africa, because there are significant Indian populations in countries like Uganda, Kenya, etc. So they are I mean, they're much better than the United States, but I think China is probably their most equitable trading partner. So now they have alternatives. Even dictators like Paul Kagame in Rwanda. Paul Kagame, because people think of Rwanda as having healed its national wounds after the genocide that took place there in the 1990s, but they fell back into the hands of a dictator again. But even somebody like Paul Kagame, even the Rwandan president Yoweri Museveni, who again another CIA-sponsored dictator, even Museveni, who essentially was like a product of the American intelligence apparatus, is now saying, well, hang on a second, hang on. The schools, they're offering me roads that actually don't lead to ports or don't lead to the border, roads that lead to other cities in Uganda. Why am I dealing with you? What am I getting out of this? What are we getting out of this? And now you're finding that many of these African presidents who were previously absolute monstrosities to their citizens are now acting as populists because they're like, wait a second, no, this is actually a better deal. And it's so odd to find that people that used to be deeply in the pocket of the United States are now saying, yeah, okay, show me something better than what they're showing me, because I really have no reason to, like, what am I getting out of this deal? What am I getting from this? I'm going to be alive for probably another 10 years before some revolutionary overthrows me, has me lined up against the wall and shot, and then we're going to end up dealing with the Chinese anyway. So why don't I just skip all that, skip the personal pain, not see my family annihilated in front of me like the Romanovs? Why don't I just become an African populist? Huh? Tell me that. And that's what scares the shit out of the United States, because they have nothing to hold over these countries anymore.
Well said. What's up? Man, I tell you guys, my boy Q Anthony Ali is too powerful. Welcome to Q Anthony Ali at night. I'm just here as a spectator. You know what I mean? I had to roll one up, you know what I mean? I had to pub because
it was just really funny that CNN showed that map the way they did, because it's like, oh my god, they just gave their game away. They're pissing themselves because they're like, if we lose control here, here's the big, and I've talked about this before. I'm pretty sure I've talked about this with you before, but here's the question. Why? Because we talked about like cell phone companies like Apple, Samsung, etc. The root of the root of the chain of exploitation that goes into making their hardware starts mostly in Central African countries that provide coltan. So we're talking about Central African Republic. We're talking about Congo, DRC, Cameroon, etc. So it all starts from there. Why is it that there are no African countries that produce cell phones? I've said that when I ask people that, they look at me like I've just asked them, like, why does if I throw a stone up in the air, why doesn't it just fall up? It's just like, yeah, why don't any African countries produce a cell phone? They're like, fucking what? Are they allowed to do that? Because it's like, well, do they not have
dominating Africa?
Would they not have the technological know-how? Huh? Well, here's the thing. Think about it this way. So these countries produce the essential components that they should have us by the balls. They should be squeezing us right now. Hang on a second. All of that comes from, like, those are resources that are under our feet. It belongs to us. This belongs to our country. Why don't I just go ahead and make my own cell phone? Or if you want these products, why don't you open a factory here in the Central African Republic, and hire Central African Republic employees to build the phones? Why don't you just do that here? Why don't you move your microprocessing operations here? The primary components of these things, the primary elements of it, they're all being shipped from outside anyway. So why don't you just open a microprocessing factory here? Why is it in Taiwan? And it's like the primary components are mined out of African Earth, and then they're shipped over to Taiwan, or the west coast of the United States, also Singapore, etc., where they're all assembled into chips, they're assembled into circuit boards, etc., and then they're assembled in some third country. It's actually not even it's China now, yes, but like they've now begun to like move their assembly operations outside of China, because China's now moving towards post-industrialism, but it's sent off to a third country to be assembled into finished products and then shipped off to the rest of the world. But the issue is these African countries, Central African Republic, Cameroon, the DRC, etc., they don't see any of that or the concomitant wealth that goes along with it. They don't have the factories, and if they don't have the factories, they don't have the workers. They don't have the workers. They don't have the flourishing economies that goes with it. So they can't afford to buy these products. They wait until all this stuff that came out of their earth circulates all the way around the world, and then the leftover products then go back to them at a premium. How the fuck does that work? And so that's what's actually happening right now with the Belt and Road Initiative, is that, remember when I pointed you to East Africa, where China has a significant presence, Ethiopia, Eritrea, Djibouti, etc., Somalia. Yeah, they are training Ethiopian engineers, like train conductors and engineers, miners, etc., tradespeople even. Why? Because, as I said, they have the components in their earth to make cement. Now, if in Nigeria you have a demand for a high-speed railway, China is in the process of building another high-speed railway. It goes from Abuja to I forget which other city, but right now they're building a high-speed railway so that people don't have to take the highways and get robbed by bandits, essentially. So they have a high-speed rail to bypass all of that. So the issue is, if you want to build high-speed rail, well, you need plenty of steel and you need plenty of concrete, right? But they import their concrete from China. Why? All the components for building concrete are right there in Ethiopia. So why are they importing it from outside of the continent when Africa, every single African country except for one, I believe it's Mauritius, but I'll have to double check that. I'm pretty sure it's the Mauritius that is not part of this free trade agreement, but every other country on the African continent is. So they can move products from country to country and not have to pay a tariff. So either the essential components for concrete or the concrete itself, like the finished concrete bags, can move from Eritrea all the way across like Africa westward to Nigeria and not pay a single tariff along the way, which means that by the time that the concrete bags land in Nigeria, they can just get to building. They don't have to pay a significant premium, right? Because previously, every country along the way would have to charge a tariff as these products move through their countries. So by the time it actually gets to Nigeria, it's been marked up so far that what's the fucking point of buying it? I can just get it cheaper from China. Now, that no longer exists. Every country on the African continent contiguously can move products from one country to another. But what's stopping that? Well, what's stopping it is that 90% of the railway that exists on the African continent is in one country, South Africa. Wonder how that happened. So all these countries, they have to build railways, they have to build roads, they have to build the infrastructure that goes along with it. They have to build oil refineries, processing plants. They have to build schools, hospitals, you name it. They have to industrialize. The Belt and Road Initiative is allowing them to industrialize. If they industrialize, guess what happens? They can finally build their own fucking cell phone. And that's all this is about. That's all of this military, all the bullshit they're feeding you on CNN to tell you that the U.S. is lacking a significant military presence on the African continent, which, I mean, that's bullshit. Like the U.S. has just been crawling all over the African continent with military bases for who the hell knows what reason, right? AFRICOM was started under the Bush administration. Yeah, it started under the Bush administration. AFRICOM was expanded under the Obama administration. But right now, all these countries are saying, well, why do we need you here? We don't need you here. Hey, listen, if people are working in factories, if they're working in, nobody really wants to work in a mine because the workers are dog shit and it's going to kill you before you hit age 40. Okay, so it's like, hang on, if we can actually make like secondary products here and tertiary products, like actual finished products, then who's going to want to run off and join some extremist organization or run off and join a bandit gang? They're like, everybody really just wants to work. The reason that they're going this way to extremism and to crime is because there's just no other way to make money here aside from going and digging coltan out of the earth with your own bare hands, okay, and then developing stomach cancer at the age of 28. Now they have alternatives. Now they can work in factories. Hey, if you work in a factory, then eventually maybe you can become like a factory foreman. You can become a manager. Bob's your uncle. Now they have alternatives, and the United States is shitting bricks because they realize if they actually have these opportunities, they don't need us. Our military is not needed here. They can govern themselves. They can manage themselves. You know what I mean? But here's the thing. They don't have the ability to do to these African countries what they're doing in Haiti right now. That's what's scaring the shit out of them.
Yeah. And I put this graph up earlier. And this is why I mentioned in the stream last week that these poor white people who vote for the duopoly, who vote for capitalists, these poor white people who vote against their own interests, these people who are counter-revolutionary, confuse the shit out of me. These poor white people confuse me, man. Because imagine you guys stole this much wealth from the global south. You guys stole this much wealth from Africa, South America. You guys plundered countless countries. And you're poor white ass, you still poor. You still poor and white. How aren't you a revolutionary? You got poor white people talking about how they're a capitalist. Poor white people talking about, I love capitalism. You're poor and white, despite the fact that your ancestors, your system stole billions in wealth. What does that say? Why aren't you furious? Now, isn't that funny now I'm putting it this way? Because shouldn't poor white people be more furious than me? Like, nigga, your people stole all this wealth and your ass is still poor. You not mad about that?
Here's the thing, man. Here's the thing. I in a way I used to be really mad at white people. Now I just kind of feel bad. Because you're right. You're asking the right questions. You're saying the right things. How are you still poor?
Doesn't make sense.